Sherlock Holmes and the Mystery of the Singing Statues. A cozy museum. Mystery at midnight. Welcome, dear friend, to this quiet corner of the night where mysteries unfold gently, like petals opening in moonlight. If you have found your way here, perhaps you are seeking rest, a soft place for your thoughts to settle, a story to carry you peacefully into sleep. Tonight, we wander together through gaslit corridors and rain-washed cobblestones, following a mystery that whispers rather than shouts, that invites curiosity without demanding urgency. Let the world beyond fade. Let your breathing slow. Tonight, you need do nothing but listen and drift and dream. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and breathe with me as we begin. London sleeps beneath a veil of autumn rain, the kind that falls steadily, persistently, drumming soft rhythms against window panes and slick pavements. The year is 1897, and the city exhales coal smoke and fog, wrapping itself in mystery as naturally as one might draw a shawl against the cold. In Baker Street, a single window glows amber through the mist, a beacon of warmth in the October darkness. Behind that window, in rooms grown familiar through countless evenings, just like this one, Sherlock Holmes sits in his leather armchair, long fingers steepled beneath his chin, grey eyes fixed upon the dancing flames of the hearth. I have known these rooms for years now, have learned their every creak and shadow, the particular way firelight catches on the Persian slipper hanging from the mantelpiece, the comforting weight of medical journals stacked beside my own chair. Tonight, the fire crackles with unusual vigour, fed by the draught that sneaks beneath the door, and outside, the rain continues its patient work, washing the city clean, muffling the distant sounds of carriages and late-night revellers, until we seem suspended in a world of our own making. Holmes has been quiet for nearly an hour, which is not unusual. His mind works in ways I have long since ceased trying to fully comprehend, following paths invisible to ordinary men, connecting fragments that others would dismiss as unrelated. I have my newspaper, though I confess the words blur somewhat in this drowsy warmth, and my teacup rests empty on the side table, forgotten. The clock on the mantel ticks steadily, a heartbeat measuring out the peaceful hours. Then comes the knock. Not a frantic pounding, nothing to startle or alarm. Simply 3 measured raps upon our door, polite yet purposeful. The knock of someone who has walked through rain-soaked streets with a specific destination in mind. Holmes stirs, unfolding from his contemplative pose with the fluid grace of a cat. He has been expecting someone, I realize, though he has said nothing to me about it. This is his way. "Come in, Mr. Aldridge," Holmes calls before our visitor can knock again, and I hear the smile in his voice, that particular amusement he reserves for his small deductions. "Dr. Watson has kept the fire admirably stoked for your arrival." The door opens to admit a gentleman of perhaps 50 years, tall and spare, with the stooped shoulders of one who spends his days bent over manuscripts and artifacts. Rain glistens on his dark overcoat and drips from the brim of his hat, which he removes with apologetic haste as Mrs. Hudson ushers him inside, clucking her tongue at the puddles forming on her clean floor. But she is kind, our Mrs. Hudson, and soon has the gentleman divested of his wet things, supplied with a chair drawn close to the fire, and promised hot tea within moments. "Mr. Holmes," our visitor begins, his voice carrying the refined tones of a scholar, soft and measured. "I apologize for the lateness of the hour. I would not have presumed upon your time were the matter not of considerable peculiarity. The Kensington Museum, Holmes says simply, settling back into his chair, and I see our visitor's eyes widen slightly in surprise. You know already. I deduce, Holmes corrects gently. The clay dust upon your trouser cuffs is of a particular reddish hue found only in the basement storage rooms of certain older London institutions. Your hands bear the telltale ink stains of someone who has spent the day cataloguing items. And there, just visible in your waistcoat pocket, is a membership card to the British Archaeological Society. But what clinches the matter is the small fragment of marble dust caught in the fabric of your left sleeve. The same Carrara marble used exclusively in the museum's sculpture gallery, which has recently undergone restoration. You are clearly not a restoration worker, given your scholarly bearing, which makes you someone with unusual access to areas currently closed to the public. An administrator, perhaps, or a senior curator, troubled by something he has discovered in those closed galleries. Before you fall asleep, write in the comments what time it is for you and where you are from. Mr. Aldrich sits in stunned silence for a moment, then releases a breath that might be a laugh or a sigh of relief. Extraordinary, he murmurs. Yes, yes to all of it. I am the assistant curator of antiquities, and Mr. Holmes, something utterly inexplicable is occurring within our walls. Mrs. Hudson arrives with the tea tray, and for a few moments we engage in the comforting ritual of pouring and sweetening. The gentle clink of porcelain, the aromatic steam rising in delicate spirals. The rain continues its whispered conversation with the windows, and the fire settles into glowing contentment. These small domesticities ground us, prepare us for mysteries that might otherwise seem too strange for acceptance. 3 nights ago, Aldrich begins, wrapping his hands around his teacup, as if drawing warmth and courage both. The night watchman reported hearing singing within the museum after midnight. Not the singing of any living person, he insisted, but something altogether more ethereal. Naturally, we dismissed this as fancy, perhaps the effect of working long hours in dim corridors. But then it happened again, and again, always after midnight, always emanating from the same location, the classical sculpture gallery on the 2nd floor. He pauses to sip his tea, and I notice his hands tremble slightly. This is a man of science and scholarship, not given to superstitious fears, and yet something has shaken him profoundly. Yesterday evening, he continues, his voice dropping lower, more intimate, as if the walls themselves might be listening. I remained in the museum after closing, determined to discover a rational explanation. I positioned myself in the gallery at 11:30, armed with a lantern and my skepticism. Mr. Holmes, when midnight struck, I heard it with my own ears, singing, a melody so beautiful it seemed to pierce directly to one's soul, emanating from the statues themselves, specifically from 3 Grecian figures that have stood in our collection for over 40 years without incident. Holmes leans forward slightly, his entire attention focused on our visitor, with an intensity that might be uncomfortable were it not somehow also deeply respectful. Describe the melody, if you would. Was it voices, words, instrumental tones? Voices, Aldrich says without hesitation. Female voices, I believe, though of an unusual quality. No words that I could discern, simply pure vocalization, harmonizing in a way that seemed almost mathematical in its precision. The sound lasted perhaps 2 minutes, then faded as gradually as it had begun. And Mr. Holmes. Here he sets down his teacup with careful deliberation. When I examined the statues by lantern light, I observed moisture upon the marble faces, as if the statues themselves had been weeping. The fire pops softly, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the rain intensifies briefly, then subsides again into its patient rhythm. Holmes rises from his chair and moves to the window, gazing out at the lamplit street below, his profile sharp against the darkness beyond. "You have not reported this to the museum's director," he observes, "and it is not a question." "No," Aldridge admits. "I fear he would think me mad, or worse, that news of such strangeness would damage the museum's reputation, perhaps lead to my dismissal. But I cannot ignore what I have experienced, and I cannot explain it through any conventional means. If the phenomenon continues, others will surely hear of it, and then—" He trails off, leaving the consequences unspoken. "And so you come to me," Holmes says softly, turning from the window. "Seeking either explanation or vindication, I wonder which." "Both, perhaps," Aldridge replies with a wan smile. "I have read accounts of your methods, Mr. Holmes. You find reason where others see only mystery. If there is a rational explanation for singing statues and weeping marble, I trust you to discover it." Holmes is silent for a long moment, and I can almost see his mind working, sorting through possibilities, constructing and discarding theories with the speed of a calculating machine. Then he nods, decisive. "Dr. Watson and I shall visit your museum tomorrow evening. We shall remain after closing and observe these phenomena for ourselves. In the meantime, I require you to change nothing about your routine. Speak of this to no one. And please, provide me with complete details about these 3 statues, their provenance, how they came to the museum, any previous incidents or unusual circumstances surrounding them." Aldridge reaches into his coat pocket and produces a leather-bound notebook, which he hands to Holmes. "I anticipated your needs," he says. "Here you will find everything documented. Acquisition records, descriptions, even sketches I made of the statue's positions. The 3 figures are part of what we call the Orpheus collection, acquired in 1857 from an estate sale in Cornwall. They are believed to be Roman copies of Greek originals, depicting 3 muses, Polyhymnia, Euterpe, and Terpsichore. The muses of hymns, music, and dance, I murmur, the classical education of my school days surfacing unexpectedly. How poetically appropriate. Indeed, Aldridge agrees. When I realized the connection, I confess I felt a chill, as if whoever created these pieces intended them for some purpose beyond mere artistic expression. Holmes accepts the notebook and pages through it briefly, his eyes scanning the careful handwriting with the speed of long practice. "Excellent documentation, Mr. Aldridge. This will prove invaluable. Now, you should return home and rest. You have done well to bring this matter to my attention, and I assure you, we shall uncover the truth behind your singing statues." Our visitor rises, relief evident in the easing of his shoulders, the first genuine smile touching his lips. Mrs. Hudson is summoned to retrieve his coat and hat, now somewhat drier, and within minutes he is gone back into the rainy night, leaving Holmes and myself alone once more with the fire and the mystery. Holmes remains standing, the notebook open in his hands, reading by the firelight. I know better than to interrupt when he's in this state of intense concentration, so I refill my teacup, still warm, blessedly, and wait. The rain has gentled to a mere whisper now, a lullaby against the windows. "Watson," Holmes says at last, closing the notebook with a soft thud, "I believe we are about to encounter something quite remarkable. Whether supernatural or merely elaborate artifice, I cannot yet say, but those statues hold secrets, and tomorrow night we shall hear them sing." He returns to his chair, and together we sit in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, each lost in our own thoughts about marble muses and midnight mysteries, while London dreams around us, and the October rain continues its patient, eternal song. Part 2. The morning arrives with reluctant light, grey and soft, filtering through clouds that seem unwilling to relinquish their hold upon the city. I wake to find Holmes already dressed, standing at our sitting room window with a cup of coffee cooling in his hand, his gaze fixed upon something invisible to ordinary eyes. He has that particular stillness about him that signals deep contemplation, and I know, without asking, that he has been awake for hours, his mind working through the puzzle presented by our midnight visitor. "Good morning, Watson." He greets me without turning, somehow sensing my presence, though I have moved quietly. "I trust you slept well. We shall need our faculties sharp for tonight's investigation." I pour myself coffee from the pot Mrs. Hudson has left, warming by the hearth. A different fire now, freshly laid, but occupying the same space as last night's flames, a continuity of warmth and comfort. "Well enough," I reply, settling into my chair with the newspaper, though in truth my dreams had been populated with singing marble and weeping stone, images that dissolved into nonsense upon waking, but left behind a curious unease. Holmes finally turns from the window, and I see he holds Aldrich's leather notebook, its pages marked with several slips of paper. "I have been reviewing our curator's documentation," he says, moving to sit across from me. "The history of these statues is more intriguing than he perhaps realized. They were originally housed in a private collection belonging to a Baron Ashworth of Cornwall, a gentleman scholar with particular interests in classical antiquity, and more notably, in the mystical traditions of ancient Greece." He opens the notebook to a marked page, showing me a careful sketch of 3 female figures in classical dress, their poses graceful and serene. Baron Ashworth acquired them during his travels through Italy in 1855, from a monastery that was selling off portions of its collection. The monks, according to records, were eager to be rid of them, though they would give no clear reason why. Ashworth brought them to his estate in Cornwall, where they remained in his private gallery for only 2 years before his death. Suspicious timing, I observe, warming my hands on the coffee cup. Indeed, and more suspicious still, the Baron died under circumstances described as peculiar by the local physician. He was found in his gallery one morning, seated before these very statues, an expression on his face described as one of transcendent peace. No marks of violence, no signs of illness, simply a cessation of life, as if he had chosen to stop breathing. Holmes's voice carries a thoughtful quality, not sensational, but genuinely curious. The estate was liquidated, and the museum acquired the statues among other antiquities, where they have stood unremarked upon for 40 years, until now. Outside, church bells begin their morning song, calling the faithful to prayer, their tones muffled by the thick air. A cart rattles past on the street below, the horse's hooves striking a steady rhythm against wet cobblestones. London wakes slowly, reluctantly, as if the city itself would prefer to remain in dreams. "What do you make of it?" I ask, though I suspect Holmes has formed several theories already. "What I make of it, dear Watson, is that we are dealing either with an extraordinarily elaborate hoax, which would require explaining how and why after 40 years of silence, or with something that challenges our conventional understanding of what marble and stone can contain." He rises and begins to pace, a habit I recognize as the physical manifestation of his racing thoughts. Consider the properties of stone, of carved figures. They are permanent, unchanging, designed to outlast their creators by centuries. And yet, what if the ancient sculptors understood something we have forgotten? What if art could be more than representation? He pauses by the mantelpiece, running his fingers along the edge thoughtfully. The Greeks believed statues could house spirits, could be animated by divine presence. The Romans copied their forms, but perhaps not always their knowledge. What if these particular statues were created with some acoustic property, some resonance that under specific conditions produces sound? Not supernatural, Watson, but scientific, an ancient technology we no longer recognize as such. It is a theory both rational and wondrous, typical of Holmes's ability to find middle ground between dismissive skepticism and credulous belief. Before I can respond, Mrs. Hudson arrives with our breakfast: eggs and toast, bacon still sizzling faintly, marmalade in a small crystal dish. The domestic normality feels almost startling after our discussion of animated statues and mysterious deaths. We eat in companionable quiet, and I find myself studying Holmes with the familiarity of long friendship. He appears calm, methodical as always, but there is an undercurrent of anticipation in his movements, a brightness to his eyes that speaks of genuine interest. It is not often that a case presents elements so unusual, so removed from the common run of theft and adultery that typically occupies his attention. "We shall need equipment," Holmes announces as he finishes his coffee. "I intend to approach this with scientific rigor. A chronometer for precise time measurement, thermometers to detect temperature changes, perhaps even a phonograph cylinder if I can procure one on short notice. If these statues sing, I want a record of it, something concrete to analyze." The day passes in preparation. Holmes dispatches several telegrams, visits a scientific instrument maker on Piccadilly, and spends 2 hours in his chemical corner conducting experiments I cannot fathom, heating substances in beakers and making careful notations in his commonplace book. I attend to correspondence and read, though my attention drifts frequently to the coming evening, to the thought of standing in a darkened museum surrounded by ancient stone, waiting for voices that should not exist. By late afternoon, the sky has darkened to the color of slate, and rain threatens once more. Holmes emerges from his chemical experiments looking satisfied, his hands stained with various compounds that he washes away meticulously at the basin. "I have been considering acoustic properties," he explains, noting my curious glance. "Marble can indeed produce tones when struck or vibrated in specific ways. Cathedral bells are cast using principles not unlike stone resonance. It is not impossible that statues could be designed to produce musical sounds. But spontaneously, I question, without being struck or activated in some visible way? Ah, that is the mystery, Watson. That is precisely what we must observe." He glances at the clock. "We should dine early. Mr. Aldridge expects us at the museum by 9 o'clock. well before the phenomenon typically manifests. That gives us time to examine the statues thoroughly, to understand their physical properties before any supposed singing begins. Dinner is a simple affair. Mrs. Hudson's excellent beef stew, bread still warm from the oven, a modest wine that nonetheless pairs well with the meal. Holmes eats with surprising appetite, always a good sign of his engagement with a problem. When he picks at his food, I worry, but tonight he seems almost boyishly enthusiastic, ready for adventure. As darkness settles fully over London, we prepare for our expedition. Holmes packs his equipment into a leather case, thermometers, a small notebook and pencils, various tools for measuring and recording, and a peculiar device he explains is a seismograph of sorts, designed to detect vibrations too subtle for human perception. I bring my service revolver, though Holmes waves it away with amusement. I hardly think we shall need to shoot the statues, Watson. Perhaps not, I concede, but museums at midnight are not without their dangers. Thieves, vagrants, living threats more immediate than singing stone. Holmes concedes the point with a shrug, and we don our coats and hats against the evening's chill. The rain has held off, but the air tastes of moisture, and fog is beginning to gather in the streets, softening the harsh edges of buildings, turning gas lamps into fuzzy golden orbs floating in the darkness. Our cab carries us through quieting streets, past shops shuttered for the night, past public houses spilling light and laughter onto pavements, past the great dark mass of Hyde Park, where trees whisper secrets to the wind. The journey takes perhaps 20 minutes, though in the fog-wrapped silence it feels both longer and somehow outside normal time, as if we travel not merely across London, but into some other realm entirely. The Kensington Museum rises before us, a grand edifice of Portland stone, its classical columns and elaborate facade speaking of empire and permanence. By day, it bustles with visitors, school groups, scholars, humanity in all its curious variety. By night, shuttered and dark, save for a few small windows where staff might linger, it takes on a different character entirely. Ancient, watchful, a repository of centuries, of civilizations that rose and fell and left behind only fragments for us to puzzle over. Mr. Aldridge awaits us at a side entrance, his face pale in the lamplight, clearly nervous despite his scholarly composure. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming. I confess I have been dreading this evening, yet I am grateful not to face it alone. Have there been any developments since last night? Holmes inquires, as Aldridge admits us through a heavy oak door that closes behind us with a resonant thud, sealing us inside. None, though I have avoided the sculpture gallery entirely today. The other staff have noticed nothing unusual. The phenomenon seems to manifest only after the museum is empty and locked for the night. He produces a keyring heavy with brass keys, and leads us down a corridor, lit by dim gas fixtures, turned low for the evening. Our footsteps echo against marble floors, and shadows dance along walls lined with glass cases containing pottery, jewellery, fragments of ancient lives frozen in museum permanence. We climb a grand staircase, its balustrade smooth beneath my hand, worn by countless visitors over decades. The building itself seems to breathe around us, settling with small creaks and sighs, the natural sounds of stone and wood responding to temperature changes, to the subtle shifts of earth beneath foundations. Or, so I tell myself, though in this atmosphere every sound takes on potential significance. The classical sculpture gallery occupies the entire eastern wing of the second floor. A long hall with vaulted ceilings and tall windows that by day would admit natural light, but now reflect only our own lamplit passage in dark glass. Statues line both walls, gods and heroes, philosophers and athletes, an assembly of marble humanity captured in idealized form. Some stand complete, others are merely torsos or heads, fragments salvaged from ruins and reverently preserved. At the far end of the gallery, positioned together as if in conversation, stand 3 female figures, each perhaps 5 feet tall, carved with exquisite detail. Even by lamplight, I can see the delicate rendering of their robes, the careful attention to the draping of fabric, the serene expressions on their marble faces. They are beautiful in the way ancient things often are, remote, perfect, untouched by the crude realities of living flesh. The Muses, Aldridge says softly, and there is something almost reverential in his tone. Polyhymnia holds her hand to her chin in contemplation. Euterpe bears the double flute, though the instrument itself is damaged. See there, one pipe has broken away, and Terpsichore seems poised in mid-dance, her robes captured in stone as if frozen in motion. Holmes approaches the statues with scientific interest, producing a small magnifying glass from his pocket and examining the marble surfaces closely. He runs his fingers along the stone, taps gently here and there, listening to the resulting sounds with his head tilted like a bird. I stand back with Aldridge, watching my friend work with the thoroughness that characterizes all his investigations. The marble is Carrara, Holmes murmurs, half to himself. Finest Italian stone, expertly carved. The bases are separate pieces, mortared in place. Age consistent with Roman period, though dating stone is always imprecise. He moves to examine the floor around the statues, then looks up at the ceiling above them. No obvious mechanical apparatus, no concealed wires or tubes that might produce sound. The gallery itself has good acoustics. Note the vaulted ceiling, the hard surfaces that would carry sound well. He sets up his equipment with methodical care. Thermometers positioned near each statue, his vibration detector placed on the floor between them, his chronometer set and verified against Aldridge's pocket watch. Finally, he produces a small camping stool, which he positions with a clear view of all 3 figures. Now, he says, settling onto the stool, we wait. Aldridge, you mentioned the singing begins at midnight. It is now 10:30. I suggest we extinguish our lamps. Darkness may be a necessary condition. Watson, position yourself there, near the gallery entrance. If anything approaches, either human or otherwise, I want to know immediately. Mr. Aldridge, you should station yourself midway between us. We follow his instructions, arranging ourselves like sentries in the darkness. The gallery is not entirely black. Moonlight seeps through the tall windows, faint and silvery, enough to make out shapes, but not details. The statues become pale forms in the gloom, their features lost, only their basic silhouettes visible. It is remarkable how different they seem without light, how the absence of detail allows imagination to fill spaces that by day are simply stone. Time passes with the peculiar quality it takes when one is waiting in darkness for something extraordinary or nothing at all. Minutes feel elongated, stretchable, as if time itself has become uncertain. I hear Aldridge shifting occasionally, hear Holmes's steady breathing from his position near the statues. Outside, London continues its nighttime existence. A distant whistle, the far-off clatter of a late carriage. sounds that reach us muffled and strange through thick walls and closed windows. My eyes adjust gradually to the darkness, finding more detail than I initially thought possible. The moonlight strengthens slightly as clouds drift past, and I can make out individual statues now, can see the three muses standing in their eternal arrangement, locked forever in marble representation of arts that were ancient when Rome itself was young. Holmes checks his chronometer. I hear the soft click of the case opening, see the brief flare of a match as he verifies the time. 11:15, he announces quietly. 45 minutes until the appointed hour, if the phenomenon maintains its pattern. The waiting continues, and despite the strangeness of our situation, I find myself growing drowsy. The darkness is comfortable in its way, the gallery warm enough, the silence peaceful. My thoughts begin to drift, considering the mystery before us, wondering what explanation Holmes will ultimately provide. He always finds one, always reduces the apparently impossible to something comprehensible. Yet, I confess I hope, in some small corner of my mind, that this case might prove truly inexplicable, might offer a glimpse of something beyond our understanding. Then, precisely as the chronometer marks midnight, the singing begins. Part 3. The sound enters the world so gradually that at first I question whether I am hearing anything at all, or merely imagining what I have been anticipating. It begins as the faintest whisper, a breath of tone so delicate it might be mistaken for the sigh of wind through distant corridors. Yet there is no wind, no draught, only the still air of the gallery, and the three marble figures standing silent and pale in the moonlight. Then the whisper strengthens, resolves into something unmistakably musical, a single sustained note, pure and clear as crystal, seeming to emanate from the very stones themselves. The tone holds, wavers slightly as if searching for pitch, then finds it with perfect certainty. A second voice joins, harmonizing a third above the first, and the sound swells with heart-stopping beauty, filling the gallery with resonance that makes the air itself seem to vibrate sympathetically. I find I have stopped breathing, my entire being focused on listening, on absorbing this impossible sound. The harmony is not merely pleasant, but mathematically precise. The intervals between notes, creating patterns that feel ancient, deliberate, as if the music follows rules older than our modern understanding. A third voice enters, completing a chord that seems to reach directly into one's chest, resonating with the rhythm of heartbeat and breath. The three voices weave together, rising and falling in patterns that suggest melody, without quite forming recognizable tunes. There are no words, only pure vocalization, yet the singing conveys emotion, longing perhaps, or remembrance, a sadness so beautiful it becomes almost joyful. The sound fills every corner of the gallery, reflects off marble floors and vaulted ceilings, surrounds us completely until it seems we exist inside the music, rather than merely hearing it from outside. I cannot say how long it lasts. Time has become irrelevant, unmeasurable. It might be 30 seconds or 3 minutes. I have no sense of duration, only of being suspended in a moment of pure auditory wonder. Then, as gradually as it began, the singing fades. The voices diminish note by note, the harmony dissolving like morning mist, until only the faintest whisper remains, and then silence, profound and somehow shocking after such beauty. My heart pounds, and I realize my hands are trembling. Across the gallery, I hear Aldrich release a shaky breath, and even Holmes, when he strikes a match to relight his lamp, shows unusual pallor, his expression one of genuine astonishment rather than his typical analytical detachment. "Extraordinary," he murmurs, his voice hoarse, as if he too has forgotten how to speak. "Utterly extraordinary." We converge on the statues, our lamps casting dancing shadows that make the marble figures seem to shift and move. Holmes immediately checks his instruments. The thermometers show no temperature change. The vibration detector has recorded nothing unusual. Yet, we all heard what we heard. There can be no doubt of that. The statues stand exactly as they were, serene and unchanging. Yet now I notice what Aldrich mentioned. Moisture on the marble faces. Small traces of wetness catching lamplight, like tears on cold cheeks. Holmes produces a clean handkerchief and carefully collects a sample of the moisture from Polyhymnia's face, folding the cloth with scientific precision. "We must analyze this," he says, his voice steadier now, the shock passing as his methodical nature reasserts itself. "Water, certainly, but perhaps containing minerals or compounds that might explain—" He stops, shaking his head. "No, that explains nothing of the sound itself." "Did you see anything?" I ask, though I know I saw nothing but statues standing motionless. "Any movement? Any light?" "Nothing," Holmes confirms. The sound appeared to come from the statues themselves, yet they remained perfectly still. No mechanism activated, no concealed performers, nothing that could account for what we heard. He circles the figures, examining them from every angle, his lamp held high to illuminate their surfaces. The marble is solid, ancient, unaltered. These are not hollow shells concealing phonographs or musical boxes. Aldrich has slumped against a nearby pedestal, his face in his hands. "You heard it," he says, and there is relief in his voice, the relief of validation. "I am not mad then. This truly happens." "You are entirely sane," Holmes assures him gently. "We all heard it, which means the phenomenon is real, objective, not hallucination or delusion. The question is not whether it happens, but how, and more interestingly, why now, after 40 years of silence?" He begins packing his equipment, moving with quick efficiency. We must research further the history of these statues, their creation, the traditions surrounding similar artifacts. "Aldrich, I need access to your archives, particularly any documentation about Baron Ashworth's acquisition of these pieces. Watson, we should return to Baker Street and begin investigating from there." The museum itself has yielded what information it can for tonight. We make our way back through the darkened corridors, our footsteps echoing differently now, as if the building itself has changed, become more aware, more present. Outside, the fog has thickened considerably, wrapping the museum in dense grey obscurity. Our cab materializes from the mist like a ghost, and we climb inside, leaving Aldrich to lock the museum behind us, to stand alone in that vast repository of history with his singing statues. The journey back to Baker Street passes in relative silence, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts about what we have witnessed. The fog transforms familiar streets into mysterious passages, landmarks appearing suddenly and disappearing just as quickly. London becoming a city of fragments and suggestions, rather than solid certainties. It feels appropriate somehow, this atmospheric uncertainty, this dissolution of the ordinary world into something more ambiguous and strange. Mrs. Hudson has left the lamps burning low for our return, and the sight of our familiar rooms brings unexpected comfort, a return to normalcy after the uncanny experience of the gallery. Holmes immediately moves to his desk, pulling books from shelves, opening volumes on classical antiquity, mythology, ancient technology. I pour brandy for us both. We need it, I think, after what we have experienced, and settle into my chair to watch him work. The ancients understood things we have forgotten, Holmes says, more to himself than to me, running his finger down a page of Greek text. Pythagoras wrote of the music of the spheres, of mathematical relationships that govern sound and harmony. The oracle at Delphi was said to be influenced by gases rising from fissures in rock, natural phenomena creating what seemed supernatural effects. What if these statues were crafted using similar principles? Not magic, Watson, but ancient science. He moves to another book, this one concerning Roman craftsmanship. The Romans were extraordinary engineers. They created self-filling lamps, automatic doors, even primitive steam engines. Their concrete still stands after 2 millennia. Why not acoustic devices, instruments of stone designed to resonate under specific conditions? But what conditions? I ask, sipping the brandy, feeling its warmth spread through my chest. What triggers the singing? And why the tears, the moisture on the marble? Condensation, perhaps, Holmes suggests, though he sounds uncertain. Temperature differentials, humidity changes at midnight when the museum cools. But that seems too simple, too mundane an explanation for something so profound. He closes the book with an unsatisfied thud and moves to the window, gazing out at the fog-shrouded street. There is something we are missing, he continues. Some element we have not yet considered. The statues sang tonight, yes, but what called them to sing? What changed after 40 years to wake whatever sleeps in that marble? He turns to face me, and in his eyes I see genuine puzzlement, a rare admission that the solution is not immediately apparent. We need more information about Baron Ashworth, about the monastery that sold these pieces, about their history before they reached England. The clock strikes 2 in the morning, its chimes seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I feel exhaustion settling into my bones, the excitement of the evening giving way to weariness. Holmes, however, shows no signs of fatigue, pacing before the fireplace with restless energy, his mind clearly racing through possibilities, constructing and discarding theories. "Get some rest, Watson," he says, noting my drooping eyelids. "I have work to do, telegrams to send, inquiries to make. By morning, I hope to have information about the monastery in Italy, about Ashworth's travels, about any other instances of statuary exhibiting unusual properties." I retire to my room, though sleep comes reluctantly, despite my exhaustion. My mind replays the singing, that impossible beauty, those 3 voices weaving harmonies that seemed to speak of things beyond language. I drift finally, my dreams populated with marble figures that move and breathe, that sing songs older than memory, that weep tears of crystal in moonlit galleries, where time itself has stopped its forward motion. Morning arrives too soon, grey light filtering through my curtains, and I wake to find Holmes already at breakfast, looking no more tired than if he had slept peacefully all night. Before him on the table lies a stack of telegram replies, and his expression suggests he has learned something significant. "Good morning, Watson," he greets me cheerfully. "We have developments. I received word from a colleague at the British Museum who specializes in Mediterranean antiquities. It seems our statues have a rather remarkable provenance. They were originally housed in a temple complex on the island of Delos, birthplace of Apollo, god of music and prophecy. The temple was dedicated to the Muses, and according to fragmentary records, the statues were believed to serve as oracles, speaking prophecies through song. He passes me a telegram, which I scan while pouring coffee. The information is tantalizing. References to ancient rituals, to priestesses who would interpret the statues' singing, to pilgrims who travelled great distances to hear divine music. The temple was abandoned in the 3rd century, its treasures scattered, and these particular statues vanished from historical record until they surfaced in that Italian monastery in the 19th century. The monks, Holmes continues, acquired them from a dealer in antiquities who had excavated them from ruins in Greece. According to the reply I received from a contact in Rome, the monastery kept the statues in storage, away from general view, and there were whispered accounts of strange occurrences, sounds in the night, unease among the brothers. When Baron Ashworth expressed interest in purchasing them, the abbot was only too happy to let them go. And Ashworth, I prompt, knowing Holmes has surely investigated that avenue as well. Ashworth was a complicated man, scholar, mystic, seeker of esoteric knowledge. His journals, which are housed at the Royal Archaeological Society, make fascinating reading. I have arranged for us to visit this afternoon to examine them. But Watson, here is what truly intrigues me. Ashworth believed the statues could be activated, that they required specific conditions to manifest their properties. He spent 2 years attempting various experiments, and shortly before his death, he wrote to a colleague claiming he had discovered the secret. What secret? I ask, though I sense Holmes does not yet have the answer. That, my dear Watson, is what we must discover. Ashworth died before he could explain his findings, and his notes are cryptic, filled with references to lunar cycles, harmonic frequencies, and something he called the resonance of devotion. Whatever he learned, it cost him his life, and now, 40 years later, the statues are singing again. Holmes stands, energized by the chase, the scent of solution in the air. We have much to do today. The Royal Archaeological Society this afternoon. Then, perhaps, a visit to someone who can analyze the moisture I collected from the statues. I want to understand every physical aspect of what we witnessed before we draw conclusions. The day unfolds with characteristic Holmes efficiency, a whirlwind of activity that leaves me breathless but entertained. We cab across London to the Royal Archaeological Society, a dignified building in Bloomsbury, where dusty scholars tend to dustier archives. We are admitted by a thin gentleman who regards Holmes with barely concealed excitement, clearly aware of his reputation. Baron Ashworth's papers, the archivist says, leading us through corridors lined with filing cabinets and storage boxes. They have been here since his estate was settled, largely unexamined. No one has requested them in decades. He produces several boxes, setting them on a reading table in a quiet corner, and leaves us to our investigation. Holmes dives in with relish, pulling out journals, letters, sketches, the accumulated documentation of a life devoted to antiquarian pursuits. I assist as I can, reading passages Holmes indicates, trying to piece together the story of a man obsessed with ancient mysteries. Ashworth's journals reveal a progression from scholarly interest to something approaching obsession. His early entries are measured, scientific, describing the statue's physical properties, their artistic merit, their historical significance. But as months pass, his writing becomes more fevered, more personal. He writes of dreams where the statues speak to him, of waking at night to hear faint music, of a growing conviction that the muses are not merely art, but vessels for something living, something aware. "Listen to this, Watson," Holmes says, his finger tracing a passage dated September 1857, only weeks before Ashworth's death. "I have determined that the statues respond to specific astronomical alignments. When the moon reaches particular positions relative to the constellation Lyra, the lyre of Orpheus, the marble seems to awaken. Tonight, I shall attempt a complete activation, using the ritual formulae I have reconstructed from fragmentary sources. If I am correct, the muses will sing as they did in ancient times, and perhaps reveal truths that have been hidden for centuries." The entry ends there. The next and final entry, in a shakier hand, reads simply, "They sang, oh God, they sang, and I understand now why the temple was abandoned, why the monks feared them. Beauty can be a weapon. Truth can destroy. I cannot." The sentence breaks off, unfinished, the final words of a man who glimpsed something he could not bear. Holmes and I exchange glances, both sobered by these words. Whatever Ashworth discovered, it was profound enough to be fatal. Yet we are now walking the same path, investigating the same mystery. Should we be concerned for our own safety? Should we stop this investigation before we too hear something we cannot unhear? Learn something we cannot unlearn? But Holmes, I know, has never turned away from truth, regardless of its nature, and I have long since committed to following where he leads. Part 4. The afternoon light filtering through the Society's tall windows has taken on a golden quality, dust motes dancing in the slanting beams like tiny stars in a private universe. Holmes continues methodically through Ashworth's papers, making occasional notes in his own book, while I find myself drawn to a series of sketches the Baron made, detailed drawings of the three muses from various angles, with notations about measurements, proportions, angles of carving that seem significant in ways I cannot quite grasp. One sketch in particular arrests my attention. It shows the three statues arranged in their current configuration, but Ashworth has drawn lines connecting them, creating geometric patterns, triangles and circles overlapping in complex arrangements. Along the margins, he has written calculations, musical notations, and what appear to be Greek words transliterated into English alphabet. I show this to Holmes, who studies it with narrowed eyes. "Sacred geometry," he murmurs, recognition dawning. The ancients believed certain spatial relationships held mystical significance. The golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, proportions that appear throughout nature, and, they believed, connected earthly forms to divine order. His finger traces the lines Ashworth drew. "See here, the positions of the statues create specific angles. 60 degrees between Polyhymnia and Euterpe, 120 between Euterpe and Terpsichore. These are harmonic intervals translated into space." He pulls out a small notebook and begins sketching, recreating Ashworth's diagram with additional annotations. If sound is vibration, and vibration can be expressed mathematically, then perhaps physical arrangement can influence acoustic properties. The statues might function collectively, not individually, a system rather than separate objects. The archivist returns, inquiring whether we require anything further. Holmes asks if there are any artifacts, any physical objects that belong to Ashworth, in addition to his papers. The gentleman considers, then brightens. There is one item, a tuning fork he apparently carried with him always. It was found in his pocket when he died. Unusual object to keep on one's person, but Baron Ashworth was known for his eccentricities. He disappears into the archives and returns with a small wooden box, which he opens to reveal a silver tuning fork, tarnished with age, but still perfectly formed. Holmes lifts it carefully, examining the markings engraved along its length. There is a note, a specific frequency marked in scientific notation, and beneath it, Greek letters spelling what I recognize as the name Apollo. "May I?" Holmes asks, and at the archivist's nod, he strikes the fork gently against the table edge. The tone that emerges is pure and sustained, a perfect A note that seems to hang in the air longer than physics should allow. The sound fills the reading room, and I feel something shift inside my chest, as if the note resonates with some internal frequency I was unaware of possessing. 432 hertz, Holmes says quietly as the tone fades. The so-called natural tuning, the frequency some believe aligns with the universe itself, rather than our modern standardized pitch. He replaces the fork carefully in its box. "Watson, I believe we have found part of Ashworth's method. This fork may be a key, quite literally, to activating the statues." We thank the archivist and depart with the loan of the tuning fork, Holmes having convinced the gentleman that it is essential to our investigation and will be returned unharmed. Outside, the afternoon has progressed toward evening, the sun already low on the horizon, shadows lengthening across London streets. We hail a cab, and Holmes directs the driver to an address in Marylebone, where, he explains, an acquaintance conducts chemical analyses. The journey takes us through increasingly residential neighbourhoods, past rows of elegant townhouses where gaslights are being lit against the encroaching dusk, past small parks where nannies shepherd children homeward before dark. London at this hour has a peaceful quality, the frantic business of day giving way to the quieter rhythms of evening, families gathering for dinner, workers returning to their hearths. Our destination proves to be a modest but well-maintained house where Professor Clement Marsh conducts his private laboratory. He is an old friend of Holmes's, a chemist of considerable skill who supplements his academic income by performing analyses for various clients, including, apparently, consulting detectives with unusual requirements. Marsh is a portly gentleman with wild white hair and permanent chemical stains on his fingers. But his eyes are sharp with intelligence, and his greeting warm with genuine affection. "Holmes, what mystery brings you to my door today? And you must be Dr. Watson. Delighted, simply delighted to meet you at last." We are ushered into his laboratory, a converted sitting room filled with glassware, burners, shelves of reagents, and reference books. The air carries scents of sulfur and alcohol, metal, and something indefinably chemical that tickles the nose. Holmes produces the handkerchief containing the moisture from the statues, which he has kept carefully preserved. "I need this analysed," Holmes explains. "Water certainly, but I suspect not merely condensation. If there are minerals, compounds, anything unusual, I must know." Marsh accepts the sample with evident curiosity and sets to work immediately, preparing slides, adding reagents, heating small portions over a spirit lamp. Holmes and I watch the process with the patience of men accustomed to waiting, while experts perform their specialized tasks. Marsh works with quick efficiency, pausing occasionally to make notes or adjust his microscope. Fascinating, he murmurs after perhaps 20 minutes of examination. The base is indeed water, but it contains dissolved calcium carbonate in unusually high concentration, essentially limestone in solution. More interesting still, there are trace amounts of organic compounds, possibly plant-based, and something I cannot quite identify, a crystalline structure that does not match any common mineral. He invites Holmes to examine his microscope, and I watch my friend's face as he studies whatever slides Marsh has prepared. Could these compounds be ancient? Holmes asks. Preserved within the marble itself, perhaps released under specific conditions. Entirely possible, Marsh confirms. Marble is metamorphosed limestone, after all. If the original stone contained trace elements, and if the statues were somehow exposed to conditions that draw moisture through the stone itself, what we see here could be essentially ancient seawater, mineralized over centuries, emerging through some capillary action. He pauses, frowning thoughtfully, though I must say, the mechanism for such emergence is unclear to me. Holmes thanks him profusely and promises to explain the full mystery once it is solved. We depart into the gathering evening, and I notice Holmes has fallen into deep contemplation, walking without apparent awareness of his surroundings, trusting his feet to find the way while his mind works through the puzzle. The statues weep ancient tears, he says finally, so quietly I almost miss the words. Water from when they were carved, trapped within the stone, emerging when they sing. Watson, we are dealing with something that spans millennia, a mystery that connects ancient Greece to Victorian London through unbroken threads of stone and sound. The clock marks 9, then 10, then 11. Holmes has not moved, might be asleep, except I know better. He is assembling the puzzle in his mind, arranging pieces until they form a coherent picture. I have seen this process countless times, have learned to wait patiently for the moment when his eyes open and he announces with complete certainty the solution. But tonight, when he finally stirs at 11:30, his expression is not one of triumph, but of uncertainty, a rare admission from a man who typically radiates confidence. I have a theory, he says slowly, but it is incomplete, and what is more troubling, it raises questions I am not certain I wish to answer. He rises and moves to his desk, retrieving Ashworth's tuning fork from where he placed it earlier. The statues sing when specific conditions align, astronomical positions, perhaps acoustic triggers, geometric arrangements. Ashworth discovered this, attempted to activate them deliberately, and died from the experience. Not from physical harm, Watson, but from something else entirely. The physician said he appeared at peace, as if he had simply chosen to stop living. Holmes turns to face me, and in the lamplight, his features seem almost haunted. What if the statue's song is not merely beautiful, but transformative? What if hearing it, truly hearing it, changes something fundamental in the listener? The ancient Greeks spoke of divine madness, of mortals who glimpse the divine and could never return to ordinary existence. What if that is not mythology, but description of genuine psychological phenomenon? You think the singing could be dangerous? I ask, feeling a chill despite the fire's warmth. I think it might be too beautiful, Holmes replies quietly. Too perfect. I think it might offer something, knowledge, experience, understanding, that makes ordinary life seem unbearable by comparison. Ashworth heard it, and could not continue living in a world that contained such beauty. What happens to us if we hear it again? What happens if we not only hear, but understand? It is a sobering thought, and we sit in silence considering it. Outside, London continues its nighttime existence, oblivious to our deliberations. A hansom rattles past. Somewhere distant, a dog barks. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary night in an ordinary city where people live and die without ever encountering mysteries that challenge their understanding of reality itself. We could stop, I say finally. Return the fork. Inform Aldrich we cannot solve his mystery. Leave the statues to sing their midnight songs unobserved. Holmes smiles, but there is sadness in it. Could we, Watson? Could you turn away now, knowing what we know, having heard what we heard? I cannot. Whatever truth those statues hold, whatever knowledge cost Ashworth his life, I must pursue it. It is my nature. But I will not ask you to accompany me further. This may be a threshold it is unwise to cross. I consider his words, searching my own heart for the answer. Am I afraid? Yes, certainly. Does the prospect of returning to that gallery, of hearing that impossible music again, fill me with unease? Absolutely. But I think of the beauty we witnessed, the harmony that seemed to speak of truths beyond language, and I know I cannot walk away. Where you go, I follow, I tell him, and it is as simple as that. We have faced danger before, Holmes. If this is danger of a different sort, so be it. We face it together. His expression softens with gratitude, and he nods. Then we return to the museum tomorrow night, but this time we go prepared with Ashworth's fork, with knowledge of the statue's arrangement, with some understanding of what we might encounter. And Watson, if at any moment you feel the experience becoming overwhelming, promise me you will leave immediately. Some knowledge may be too heavy to carry. Morning arrives with rain, a steady downpour that drums against the windows and floods the gutters, turning Baker Street into a river of grey water. Holmes is already up, dressed, studying the notes he made yesterday with intense concentration. On the table beside him sits Ashworth's tuning fork, innocent-looking silver, that may hold the key to mysteries better left unsolved. Today we prepare, Holmes announces as I join him for breakfast. We review everything we have learned. We formulate our approach, we ready ourselves for whatever tonight may bring. And Watson, we write down our findings thus far, seal them, give them to Mrs. Hudson with instructions to deliver them to Mycroft should we fail to return. Insurance, you understand, that our knowledge is not lost. It is a grim thought, but a practical one. We spend the morning documenting everything. Aldrich's initial visit, the singing we witnessed, Ashworth's papers, Marsh's analysis. Holmes writes in his precise hand, creating a record that reads like scientific paper, rather than adventure story, dry and factual, stripping away the supernatural atmosphere to leave only observed phenomena and logical deductions. By afternoon, the rain has lessened to drizzle, and Holmes suggests we walk, needing movement to order his thoughts. We wander through wet streets, collar up against the damp, discussing theories and possibilities. Holmes believes the statues contain some property, possibly acoustic chambers within the marble itself, that responds to specific stimuli. The tuning fork, he theorizes, might provide the initial vibration, which the statues then amplify and harmonize according to their arrangement and internal structure. But why would ancient sculptors create such things? I ask, as we pause at a corner, waiting for a break in traffic to cross. Perhaps as instruments of worship, Holmes suggests. Imagine being a pilgrim at that temple in Delos, hearing divine music seemingly produced by stone. Your faith would be confirmed, your devotion deepened, or perhaps for oracular purposes, the singing might induce trance states in which prophecies could be received. The Greeks understood psychology, even if they lacked our terminology. They knew how to move people's minds through sound and spectacle. We return to Baker Street as darkness falls, both of us feeling the weight of the coming night, the knowledge that we are about to deliberately invoke something that killed a man 40 years ago. Part 5. Evening settles over London with unusual quietness, as if the city itself holds its breath in anticipation. The rain has stopped entirely, leaving behind glistening streets that reflect gaslight in wavering golden pools, and the air carries that peculiar clarity that follows storms, sharp and clean and somehow expectant. Holmes and I dine early, speaking little, each absorbed in private thoughts about what awaits us at the museum. Mrs. Hudson senses something significant in our preparations, though we have told her nothing specific. She fusses over us more than usual, ensuring we have eaten properly, that our coats are brushed and ready, that we carry umbrellas should the rain return. When Holmes hands her the sealed envelope containing our documented findings, requesting she deliver it to his brother if we do not return by morning, her face pales slightly. But she asks no questions, simply nods and tucks the envelope carefully into her apron pocket. "You be careful now, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she says quietly at the door. "Whatever you are about tonight, please come back safe." "We intend to, Mrs. Hudson," Holmes assures her, with a warmth he reserves for few people. "We are merely solving a mystery, nothing more dangerous than that." But we both know he is not being entirely truthful, and I suspect she knows it too. Still, she stands in the doorway as we descend to the street, watching until we disappear into the evening crowds, a worried maternal presence that touches me unexpectedly. Our cab ride to Kensington passes through a transformed London. The post-rain clarity has brought people out despite the cold, and the streets bustle with evening theatre-goers, diners heading to restaurants, couples strolling arm in arm. Life continues its normal patterns, ordinary people pursuing ordinary pleasures, unaware that in a locked museum across the city, 3 marble statues wait to sing songs that transcend the boundaries between ancient and modern, between stone and living voice. Aldrich meets us at the same side entrance as before, but tonight he appears even more agitated, his hands shaking as he unlocks the heavy door. "I am grateful you have returned," he says, his voice tight with tension. "Last night, after you left, I could not sleep. I kept hearing that music in my mind, over and over. It was beautiful, yes, but also deeply unsettling, as if I had heard something not meant for human ears." Holmes places a reassuring hand on the curator's shoulder. "Your reaction is natural, and, I believe, wise. The phenomenon we are investigating operates on psychological levels as well as physical ones. Tonight, however, we come prepared with greater understanding and, I hope, with means to control the experience rather than simply witness it." He produces Ashworth's tuning fork from his coat pocket, and Aldrich's eyes widen in recognition. "That is the Baron's fork. I have seen it in archive photographs. Where did you obtain it?" "The Royal Archaeological Society, with permission," Holmes explains, as we make our way through the darkened corridors toward the sculpture gallery. "I believe this instrument is key to activating the statues deliberately. Ashworth discovered something about harmonic frequencies, about using sound to trigger resonance in the marble. Tonight, we test his theories under controlled conditions. The gallery awaits us much as we left it, moonlight streaming through tall windows, statues standing in their eternal arrangements. But tonight, knowing what these particular three figures can do, they seem different somehow, more present, more aware, as if they anticipate our arrival. The three muses regard us with their blank stone eyes, their marble faces serene and beautiful and utterly inhuman. Holmes has brought additional equipment tonight, more thermometers. A device, he explains, can measure barometric pressure. Several candles arranged in specific positions around the statues. He works methodically, setting up his instruments, taking initial measurements, documenting the baseline conditions before we attempt anything unusual. I assist where I can, but mostly I watch, feeling my heart rate increase with anticipation and anxiety in equal measure. The arrangement is important, Holmes murmurs, more to himself than to us, studying the positions of the three statues. Ashworth documented specific angles, geometric relationships. The statues are not randomly placed, but positioned to create acoustic focusing points, areas where sound would naturally amplify and concentrate. He produces a small compass and takes measurements, comparing them to notes he made from Ashworth's papers. Satisfied, he positions himself at what he determines is the optimal location, directly in front of the three statues, equidistant from each, standing where the geometric lines Ashworth drew would intersect. Aldridge and I stand further back, near the gallery entrance, observers rather than participants in whatever is about to occur. Holmes checks his pocket watch. 11:45, 15 minutes until midnight, when the statues have previously manifested their phenomenon spontaneously. I propose we attempt activation now, at a non-traditional time, to determine if the effect is purely astronomical, or can be triggered through deliberate action. He holds Ashworth's tuning fork, silver metal catching moonlight, and for a moment simply stands there, breathing deeply, centering himself. Then, with a smooth motion, he strikes the fork against the marble base of Polyhymnia's statue. The tone that emerges is pure and perfect. That same note we heard at the Society, 432 Hz, resonating through the gallery with crystalline clarity. For several heartbeats, nothing happens. The tone sustains, fades, dies away into silence. The statues remain motionless, simply carved stone reflecting moonlight. I begin to think the experiment has failed, that whatever conditions are necessary have not been met, when I notice something, a faint vibration in the air, barely perceptible, as if the tone has not truly faded, but transformed into something just below the threshold of hearing. Holmes senses it too. He strikes the fork again, holding it near Euterpe's statue this time, and again the tone rings out. The subliminal vibration strengthens, and now I can see it as well as feel it. The air itself seems to shimmer slightly around the statues, like heat waves rising from sun-warmed pavement, a visible distortion of space that should not exist in the cool night air. The third strike, against Terpsichore's base, and suddenly the statues respond. Not with the gradual emergence we witnessed before, but instantly, powerfully, all three voices erupting simultaneously into full song. The harmony so intense, so overwhelming, that I stagger backward, my hands instinctively rising to my ears, though they provide no real protection against sound that seems to penetrate not through the ears, but directly into consciousness itself. The music is the same, yet different from before. The same mathematical precision. The same ancient beauty, but magnified, concentrated, as if we have triggered something at full intensity, rather than allowing it to build gradually. The three voices weave patterns of sound that are simultaneously melody, harmony, and rhythm, creating music that seems to exist in more dimensions than should be possible, that suggests geometries beyond normal space. Holmes stands transfixed at the center of the acoustic focus, and I see his face transformed by what he is experiencing. His eyes are closed, his expression one of profound concentration, mixed with something approaching ecstasy. And I realize with sudden fear that he is not simply listening, but being changed by what he hears, that the music is doing something to him on levels I cannot fully comprehend. The singing intensifies, and now I understand what Ashworth meant about beauty being a weapon. This is not merely pleasant sound, but something that reaches into the core of one's being, that reveals truths too vast for ordinary consciousness to contain. I see patterns in the sound, mathematical relationships that suggest the fundamental structure of reality itself, harmonies that mirror the movements of planets, the vibration of atoms, the great cycles of existence that span from the infinitesimally small to the cosmically large. Aldridge has collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the experience. I myself feel my thoughts fragmenting, dissolving into pure sensation, as if the music is dismantling the ordinary structures of mind and replacing them with something older, more fundamental. Language becomes meaningless. Time loses linearity. I am simultaneously here in this gallery and somewhere vastly distant, seeing through eyes that are not my own, understanding things I have no framework to express. Then, through the overwhelming beauty, I hear Holmes's voice, though his lips do not move, not heard with ears, but perceived directly, his thoughts somehow audible in this altered state the music has created. Watson, bear witness. Remember what you see here. I am going deeper, following where the sound leads. Do not try to follow. Return when you can. And he is gone. Not physically, but in some other sense. His consciousness following threads of music into spaces I cannot perceive, leaving his body standing motionless at the center of the gallery, while the statues sing their impossible song and the marble faces weep their ancient tears. I fight against the dissolution, clinging to my sense of self with desperate determination. I am John Watson. I am a doctor, a former soldier, a rational man trained in science and empiricism. I am standing in a museum in London in the year 1897. These anchors hold me, barely, while around me reality seems to thin and waver, revealing glimpses of something beyond. Vast intelligences moving through spaces we do not normally perceive. Beings of pure pattern and mathematical relationship. Entities that might be gods, or might simply be aspects of a universe far stranger than our ordinary experience suggests. The statues are not creating this music, I suddenly understand. They are translating it, receiving vibrations from somewhere else, from some other level of existence, and converting them into frequencies. Human ears can detect, human minds can attempt to process. They are instruments, yes, but also doorways, conduits through which something vast and ancient can touch our small, momentary world. How long this continues, I cannot say. Minutes, hours. Time has ceased to function in any meaningful way. But gradually, incrementally, the music begins to fade, the intensity diminishing, the overwhelming presence withdrawing like a tide receding from shore. The three voices separate, distinct once more rather than unified, and one by one they fall silent. First terpsichore, then euterpe, finally polyhymnia, each voice fading to whisper, and then to nothing, leaving only ordinary silence behind. I find I am lying on the marble floor, though I have no memory of falling. Aldridge is nearby, curled in a fetal position, sobbing quietly, and Holmes stands where he was, swaying slightly, but upright, his eyes opening slowly as if awakening from profound sleep. He looks at me, and I see in his gaze something that was not there before, a depth of understanding, perhaps, or a sorrow, or both, intermingled in ways I cannot separate. "Watson," he says, and his voice sounds distant, hollow, as if it reaches me across great spaces. "You remained yourself. Good. I was concerned I might have lost you both." He moves to help me to my feet, his hands steady despite everything, and together we assist Aldridge to rise. The curator is shaking, barely coherent, murmuring about angels and demons and things that should not be, his rational mind clearly shattered by what he has experienced. Holmes speaks to him gently, soothingly, offering reassurances that sound hollow even to my ears. How do you reassure someone who has glimpsed infinity? The statues stand silent once more, simply carved stone, but the moisture on their faces is more pronounced now, actual tears running down marble cheeks, pooling at their bases, reflecting moonlight like scattered diamonds. Holmes collects samples methodically, his scientific training reasserting itself even after transcendent experience, documenting physical evidence of metaphysical events. "We must leave," he says quietly. "Aldridge, can you walk? We need to get you home, get you somewhere safe where you can rest, where the memory can begin to fade." We make our way through the museum, supporting Aldridge between us, navigating darkened corridors that seem longer than before, as if distance itself has become uncertain. Outside, the night air is shockingly cold and real, a slap of ordinary sensation that helps ground me in normalcy. We secure a cab. The driver regards our disheveled state with suspicion, but accepts our coin readily enough, and deliver Aldridge to his lodgings in Chelsea, ensuring his landlady understands he is unwell and needs rest. Then, finally, we are alone in the cab, rattling through empty streets toward Baker Street, and the silence between us is heavy with things we cannot yet articulate. Holmes sits with his hands pressed together beneath his chin, his expression distant, processing what he has experienced. I watch him with concern, remembering Ashworth, wondering if my friend has crossed some threshold from which return is impossible. "I am well, Watson," he says suddenly, reading my thoughts as he so often does. Shaken, profoundly altered perhaps, but not broken. What we experienced tonight, what I experienced when I went deeper into the phenomenon, it was both terrible and wonderful. I saw patterns, Watson, the underlying mathematics of existence itself, the equations that govern not just matter and energy, but consciousness, meaning, beauty. I understood, for brief moments, why the universe is structured as it is, why suffering and joy must coexist, why... He breaks off, shaking his head, but already the understanding fades. It is too vast for human minds to retain, like trying to hold ocean in cupped hands. The water slips through, leaving only the memory of wetness, of cold, of something that was once grasped and is now lost. Part 6. We arrive at Baker Street to find Mrs. Hudson waiting despite the late hour, relief flooding her features when we enter intact if somewhat worn. She asks no questions, simply insists on preparing hot tea and ensuring we are settled comfortably before the fire, which she has kept burning in our absence. Her intuitive understanding of what we need, warmth, normalcy, the familiar rituals of home, steadies us both more than words could. Holmes sits in his accustomed chair, accepting the tea with grateful hands, though I notice they tremble slightly when he lifts the cup. I position myself across from him, studying his face in the firelight, searching for signs of the transformation he alluded to in the cab. He appears himself, yet something in his eyes has deepened, as if he has seen distances that cannot be measured in miles or years. "Tell me what you remember," I say gently, pulling out my notebook, while the experience is still fresh, before the details fade, for the record, for understanding. Holmes is silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts, arranging experiences that may defy arrangement into linear narrative. When he speaks, his voice is low, contemplative, choosing words with unusual care. "The music continued long after your conscious perception of it ended," he begins. "Or rather, your mind protected itself by limiting what you could process, while I, standing at the acoustic focus with deliberate intent, received the full transmission. The statues are indeed conduits, Watson, but not in any supernatural sense. They are technology, ancient, sophisticated technology, created by people who understood resonance and consciousness in ways we have forgotten." He sets down his teacup and leans forward, animated now by the familiar excitement of explanation. The marble itself has been treated, infused with crystalline structures that respond to specific frequencies. When struck with the correct tone, Ashworth's tuning fork provides exactly that frequency. The crystals vibrate in cascade patterns, creating interference waves that propagate not just through air, but through more subtle mediums we have no names for. These waves interact with human consciousness directly, bypassing normal sensory processing. "But the singing," I interject, "the actual voices, the melodies, where do those originate?" "From us," Holmes says simply, "or rather, from the interaction between the statue's vibrations and our own neural patterns. The statues provide carrier waves, templates, and our minds fill them with content drawn from deep wells of human experience. Archetypal patterns, mathematical relationships, harmonic structures that feel universal because they arise from the fundamental organization of consciousness itself. The Greeks who created these understood something profound, that there are frequencies at which mind and matter resonate together, at which the distinction between observer and observed dissolves." He rises and begins pacing, energy returning as he works through implications. Ashworth went too deep, too quickly, without preparation or protection. He heard not just the music, but understood its full meaning, saw the patterns behind patterns, and that understanding revealed to him how small and temporary human existence is, how vast and indifferent the cosmos. The peace on his face was not transcendence, but surrender. He simply stopped struggling against the immensity he had glimpsed. "And you?" I ask quietly. "You went deep as well. How did you maintain yourself?" Holmes pauses, considering. "Training, perhaps. Years of disciplining my mind, of maintaining analytical detachment even in the face of profound emotion. Or perhaps simply stubbornness. I refuse to surrender, refuse to let the beauty overwhelm identity. I rode the waves of understanding, but did not let them wash away the shore of self. He smiles slightly. And I had you as anchor, Watson. Knowing you remained behind, holding witness, gave me a tether to return along. The fire crackles, sending sparks up the chimney. And outside, London continues its eternal rhythms, unaware that two men in Baker Street have touched something that exists beyond the city's solid geography. I find myself profoundly grateful for this room, for tea and firelight and familiar furnishings, for the ordinary world that persists, despite glimpses of extraordinary depths beneath its surface. What do we do now? I ask. We cannot simply leave the statues in the museum, knowing what they can do. What if someone else discovers how to activate them? What if others have the experience Ashworth had? Holmes finishes. It is a legitimate concern. But Watson, we cannot destroy them, and removing them would only relocate the danger, not eliminate it. The statues exist. The knowledge exists. We cannot unknow what we now know. He returns to his chair, sudden weariness evident in his movements. Tomorrow we will speak with Aldridge, assess his condition, determine what information must be shared, and what is better kept quiet. The museum's director must be informed of something, though not necessarily the full truth. Perhaps we recommend the statues be moved to storage, protected behind barriers of bureaucracy and forgotten inventory. And the singing, I press. Will it continue? Now that they have been activated, will they sing every midnight? I do not believe so, Holmes says thoughtfully. I think tonight's manifestation was particularly intense because we triggered it deliberately at full strength. The spontaneous occurrences Aldridge witnessed were likely partial activations caused by random environmental factors. Lunar alignments creating subtle vibrations, barometric pressures, acoustic anomalies. Complete activation requires deliberate action, the correct frequency applied at precise locations. Without Ashworth's fork and the knowledge of how to use it, the statues should remain dormant. He produces the silver fork from his pocket, turning it thoughtfully in the firelight. This, I think, should be secured somewhere safe, not destroyed. It is a historical artifact of considerable significance, but removed from easy access. Perhaps Mycroft can arrange something through government channels. A museum collection, accessible only to authorized researchers. We sit in silence then, exhaustion finally catching up with the adrenaline that has sustained us through the evening. The clock strikes 3 in the morning, its chimes seeming to come from a great distance, and I realize I can barely keep my eyes open. Holmes notices, as he always does. Sleep, Watson. We have done what we set out to do, solved the mystery of the singing statues. Tomorrow we deal with practicalities and consequences. Tonight we rest. I retire to my room, certain I will lie awake for hours, my mind churning through the evening's experiences. Instead, I fall asleep almost immediately, plunging into deep, dreamless oblivion, my consciousness apparently in need of respite from the extraordinary demands placed upon it. Morning arrives with pale sunlight filtering through curtains, the gentle sounds of Mrs. Hudson moving about downstairs, the comforting normalcy of a London day beginning its ordinary business. I wake feeling surprisingly refreshed, though my memories of the previous night have already taken on a dreamlike quality, vivid but somehow unreal. as if they happened to someone else or in some other lifetime. Holmes is already up, dressed impeccably as always, showing no signs of his late-night ordeal, beyond perhaps slightly deeper shadows beneath his eyes. He greets me cheerfully, seeming almost relieved to return to normal routines. Over breakfast, Mrs. Hudson has outdone herself, with eggs, sausages, fresh bread, with butter and jam. We discuss the day's necessities. I have sent word to Aldridge, requesting we meet him this afternoon at his lodgings. Holmes informs me. I want to assess his mental state, ensure he recovers from the experience. The human mind is remarkably resilient, but it can also be fragile when confronted with experiences it has no framework to integrate. Then we seek appropriate care for him, discreetly, of course. The last thing needed is scandal or public inquiry into what occurred. Holmes butters his toast with careful precision. I have also sent a telegram to Mycroft outlining the situation in general terms. If anyone can arrange for the tuning fork's secure storage and ensure the statues are protected from curious interference, it is my brother. The morning passes in quiet domesticity. I catch up on correspondence, while Holmes disappears into his chemical corner, apparently conducting follow-up analyses on the samples he collected. The sounds of his work, the clink of glassware, the scratch of pen on paper, his occasional satisfied murmurs, provide comforting background to my own activities. Around 2 o'clock, we cab across London to Chelsea, to the modest boarding house where Aldridge maintains rooms. The landlady, a Mrs. Pemberton, admits us with obvious relief. "Oh, thank goodness you've come, gentlemen. Mr. Aldridge has been in a terrible state since last night. Won't eat, barely sleeps, keeps muttering about music and angels. I was about to call for a doctor." "We are here now," Holmes assures her. "Perhaps you could bring tea to his rooms, and we require privacy for our consultation." She agrees readily, clearly grateful to have the responsibility shared, and directs us to a second-floor room overlooking a small garden. We knock gently, and Aldridge's voice, thin and uncertain, bids us enter. The curator sits by his window, still in his dressing gown, though the afternoon is well advanced, staring out at bare trees and grey sky. He turns as we enter, and I am shocked by the change in his appearance. His face is haggard, eyes red-rimmed from crying or sleeplessness or both. His normally neat hair wild and uncombed. Yet when he sees us, something like relief crosses his features. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you came. I was not certain you would, or even if last night truly happened. Perhaps it was all delusion, breakdown, madness." His voice carries desperate hope that we will confirm his doubts. Tell him nothing occurred. Holmes pulls a chair close and sits, his manner gentle, professional. "It happened, Aldridge. We were all there. We all experienced the phenomenon. You are not mad, though what we witnessed would challenge any rational mind." "Then it was real," Aldridge whispers. "The singing, the visions, the sense of being dissolved into pure sound." Tears begin sliding down his cheeks. How do I return to normal life knowing what I know? How do I catalogue pottery shards and ancient coins when I have heard the music of spheres, when I have glimpsed the mathematics underlying existence itself? It is the question we all face, I realize. The central dilemma of having experienced something that transcends ordinary reality. How does one continue with the mundane after touching the extraordinary? How does one unknow what has been known? Holmes leans forward, speaking with quiet intensity. by remembering that the ordinary is also extraordinary, Aldridge. Those pottery shards were shaped by human hands, used in human lives, carried meanings and memories for people who loved and struggled and found beauty in their brief existences. The coins purchased bread that fed children, paid for journeys that changed lives. The mundane world is shot through with miracle. We simply forget to see it until something strips away our habitual blindness. He reaches out, places a hand on Aldridge's shoulder. What you experienced last night was real, but it is not the only reality. It is one frequency among many, one way of perceiving among countless possibilities. You can carry the memory without letting it destroy your engagement with this world, this moment, this particular form of existence we all share. Aldridge listens, absorbing Holmes's words, and slowly I see some of the desperate tension ease from his frame. Mrs. Pemberton arrives with tea, and the simple ritual of pouring and sweetening, of holding warm cups and taking civilized sips, seems to ground him further in normalcy. The statues, he says after a while. What happens to them now? I cannot work near them, knowing what they contain. I cannot. They will be moved to storage, Holmes assures him. I will recommend to the museum's director that they be relocated for conservation purposes, protected from environmental factors that might damage them. You need not encounter them again unless you choose to. I will not choose to, Aldridge says with certainty. Once was enough, more than enough. He manages a wan smile. Though I confess, even now, part of me wants to hear that music again, wants to return to that state of understanding. Is that madness, Seven? Not madness, Holmes replies thoughtfully, settling back in his chair with his teacup balanced elegantly in one hand. Merely human. We are drawn to beauty, even when it threatens to consume us. Drawn to knowledge, even when it challenges our comfort. The ancient Greeks understood this. Their myths are filled with mortals who glimpse divine realms and spend the rest of their lives haunted by the memory, forever changed, yet unable to return. He pauses, choosing his next words carefully. But Aldridge, there is wisdom in knowing when to step back, when to say one has ventured far enough. The statues will remain, the knowledge will persist, but you need not be their guardian or their interpreter. Let that burden pass to others, or to no one at all. Your life holds value beyond this one extraordinary encounter. We remain with Aldridge for another hour, talking of ordinary things. His work at the museum on projects unrelated to the classical gallery, his interests in Egyptian artifacts, his plans for cataloguing a recent acquisition of Mesopotamian cylinder seals. Gradually, conversation itself becomes medicine, the rhythm of normal discourse pulling him back toward equilibrium. By the time we take our leave, he appears markedly improved, still shaken, but no longer teetering on the edge of psychological collapse. Thank you, he says at the door, shaking our hands with genuine warmth, for believing me, for investigating, for helping me understand what occurred, and for reminding me that ordinary life still holds meaning, even after extraordinary experience. Outside, the afternoon has turned colder, clouds gathering overhead with the promise of evening rain. Holmes and I walk for a while, rather than immediately hailing a cab, both of us needing movement, fresh air, the simple pleasure of London streets bustling with everyday activity. We pass shop windows displaying goods for the approaching Christmas season. Already, though November has barely begun, merchants are preparing for the year's commercial crescendo. He will recover, Holmes says, as we pause at a corner, watching traffic flow past. Humans are remarkably adaptable. Within weeks, the intensity of his memory will fade. The experience will become something that happened rather than something perpetually happening. He will return to his work, his routines, and the statues will become just another mystery he once encountered, no more or less disturbing than countless other historical enigmas. And us, I ask, will we forget as easily? Holmes considers, his gaze distant. I do not think I can forget, Watson, nor do I particularly wish to. What we experienced, what I experienced at the deepest level, has altered my understanding of consciousness, of reality's structure. But unlike Ashworth, I need not let that understanding paralyze me. Knowledge of the vast need not diminish appreciation of the small. If anything, it should enhance it. We resume walking, turning down a quieter street lined with plane trees, their branches nearly bare now, preparing for winter's dormancy. The rhythm of our footsteps, the comfortable silence between us, the familiar weight of London around us. These simple things feel precious in a way they might not have before, as if our brush with the extraordinary has polished our perception of the ordinary until it gleams with newfound significance. I will write the report for Mycroft tonight, Holmes says, as we finally hail a cab back to Baker Street. Complete documentation of the phenomenon, recommendations for the statue's handling, analysis of the mechanisms involved. Then I will seal that report and try to move beyond this case. There are other mysteries waiting, Watson. Problems that need solving, wrongs that need righting. Life continues its forward motion, and we must continue with it. Back at Baker Street, we find a telegram waiting from Mycroft. Brief, characteristically cryptic. Your message received. Arrangements being made. Artifact will be secured by week's end. Suggest no further experimentation. M. Holmes reads it aloud, then folds it carefully and places it in his desk drawer, alongside other correspondence, too sensitive for casual handling. The evening passes quietly. Holmes does indeed write his report. Pages of precise documentation that reduce the previous night's transcendence to scientific observation, measurable phenomena, reproducible results. I watch him work, marveling at his ability to analyze experiences that defied analysis, to impose order on encounters with disorder. It is his gift, and perhaps his shield, the capacity to maintain rational framework, even when touching the irrational. I attempt to write my own account for my records, but find the words inadequate, unable to capture the essence of what occurred. How does one describe music that exists in dimensions beyond normal hearing? How does one convey understanding that dissolves upon examination, like dreams that fade upon waking? I write what I can, the factual sequence of events, the physical details, the concrete observations, but the heart of the experience remains ineffable, resistant to language. Mrs. Hudson serves dinner, a roasted chicken with vegetables and potatoes, comfort food that grounds us in bodily existence, in the simple necessity of eating and the pleasure of well-prepared meals. We discuss nothing related to the case, instead talking of theatre, of current events, of mutual acquaintances, and their various dramas. Holmes is particularly amusing on the subject of a recent scandal involving a government minister and a misplaced briefcase, spinning theories with theatrical flair until I am laughing despite myself. Later, as we sit before the fire with brandy and books, Holmes looks up suddenly from the volume he has been reading. a text on acoustic theory naturally, and says, "Watson, I want to thank you for accompanying me through this investigation, for standing witness when I went into the depths, for remaining yourself when reality became uncertain. I could not have navigated it safely alone." "You would have managed," I reply, though I am touched by his acknowledgement. "You always do." "Perhaps," he concedes, "but at greater cost. Having you there, knowing you watched over my physical form while my consciousness wandered, gave me confidence to venture further than I might have otherwise dared. Partnership has value beyond mere convenience, my friend. It provides ballast, stability, the assurance that someone will pull you back if you drift too far from shore." We let silence settle then, comfortable and companionable. Two men who have shared extraordinary experience and emerged intact, perhaps even strengthened. Outside, the promised rain begins, gentle at first, then steady, drumming against windows and streaming down gutters, London's eternal lullaby. The days that follow bring resolution to practical matters. Mycroft proves as efficient as always. Within a week, Ashworth's tuning fork has been transferred to a secure government facility, where it joins other artifacts deemed too significant or dangerous for public access. The museum's director, informed by Holmes that the 3 statues show signs of structural instability requiring conservation treatment, authorizes their removal to climate-controlled storage, where they will remain indefinitely, visited only by specialized researchers with appropriate clearances. Aldridge returns to work, still somewhat subdued but functional, focusing his energies on projects far removed from classical sculpture. He sends us a note thanking us again for our assistance, mentioning that he sleeps better now, dreams less frequently of marble tears and impossible harmonies. The museum continues its daily operations, visitors flowing through galleries, unaware that 3 particular statues have been removed, that a mystery has been solved and carefully buried beneath layers of administrative procedure and classified documentation. Life, as Holmes predicted, moves forward. New cases arrive, a matter of blackmail involving a duke's daughter, a puzzling theft from a jeweller's vault, a series of break-ins that Holmes connects to a former acrobat's unique skills. We investigate, deduce, solve the familiar rhythm of our partnership, resuming its comfortable patterns. Yet, I notice changes, subtle shifts in Holmes's approach. He seems more patient with clients' emotions, more willing to acknowledge that not all mysteries require complete explanation, that some truths are better partially revealed than fully exposed. One evening, perhaps 3 weeks after our experience at the museum, I find Holmes at the window, gazing out at fog-shrouded Baker Street, his expression distant and thoughtful. I join him there, and we stand together, watching the city disappear into grey obscurity. "Do you think about it often?" I ask quietly. "The singing, the understanding you gained?" "Every day," he admits, but the memory fades as I knew it would, like trying to recall the specific notes of a symphony days after hearing it. I remember that I understood, remember the sensation of comprehension, but the actual content dissolves like ice in sunlight. Perhaps that is mercy, Watson. Perhaps human consciousness cannot retain such knowledge permanently without fragmenting under the weight. Some mysteries should remain mysteries, I venture. Perhaps, Holmes agrees. Or perhaps all mysteries eventually yield to sufficient investigation, but not all solutions can be spoken aloud, shared, made comprehensible to others. The statues sang, Watson. We heard them. we touched something ancient and profound. That it defies complete explanation does not diminish its reality. Another case interrupts our philosophical discussion. Mrs. Hudson arrives with a visitor, an elderly gentleman with a problem involving disputed inheritance and possible forgery. Holmes transforms instantly into his professional self, all attention focused on the new puzzle, the singing statues relegated to memory where they will remain, preserved like all our adventures, documented in my notebooks and in the sealed report now residing in government archives. But sometimes, in quiet moments late at night, when Baker Street sleeps and only firelight illuminates our rooms, I catch Holmes gazing at nothing visible, his expression distant, and I know he is remembering music that transcended sound, understanding that exceeded language, a moment when three marble muses sang their ancient songs, and reality revealed itself to be far stranger and more wonderful than our daily experience suggests. The world continues its rotation. London pursues its business. Life flows forward in its inevitable current. Yet, we carry with us the knowledge that beneath the surface of ordinary existence, deeper patterns persist, harmonies beyond hearing, truths that cannot be spoken, but only experienced. And perhaps that is enough, to know that mystery endures, that beauty exists in forms we barely comprehend, that the universe holds secrets we may glimpse, but never fully possess. The rain continues outside, steady and patient, washing the city clean, and inside our warm rooms, we settle into evening's comfortable routine, two friends who have ventured to the edge of understanding and returned to tell the tale, however inadequately. The fire burns low, the clock marks passing hours, and somewhere in a museum storage facility, three marble figures stand silent in darkness, keeping their ancient secrets, waiting perhaps for the next curious soul who dares to make them sing. But that is a story for another time, another investigator. For us, this mystery is complete, understood as much as it can be, resolved to the extent that human minds can resolve encounters with the numinous. We have done our part, documented what we could, protected others from dangers we barely survived ourselves. Now we rest, grateful for the ordinary world, for warm fires and strong tea, for friendship and routine, for all the small miracles that comprise a life well lived. Part 8. Winter settles over London with unusual gentleness this year, bringing cold certainly, but without the harsh bite that sometimes characterizes December. Snow falls occasionally, transforming the city into something from a Christmas card, softening harsh edges and muffling sounds until the streets seem wrapped in peaceful quiet. Holmes and I continue our work, investigating cases both mundane and unusual, but always I sense beneath his methodical deductions a deeper current of thought, as if part of his mind remains occupied with questions that have no easy answers. It is perhaps a month after our experience at the museum when something unexpected occurs. I return to Baker Street one evening after visiting a patient in Kensington to find Holmes entertaining a visitor, a woman of perhaps 60 years, elegantly dressed in mourning black, her silver hair arranged with dignified simplicity. She rises as I enter, and I am struck by the intelligence in her eyes, the bearing that suggests both strength and sorrow. "Dr. Watson," Holmes greets me. "May I introduce Lady Margaret Ashworth, niece to the late Baron Ashworth, whose papers we examined during our recent investigation." I bow, accepting her offered hand, noting the slight tremor in her fingers that might indicate age or emotion, or both. Holmes gestures for me to join them, and Mrs. Hudson, with her usual impeccable timing, arrives with fresh tea and another cup for my use. Lady Ashworth has come with information she believes may interest us, Holmes explains once we are settled. Information concerning her uncle's final days and the circumstances surrounding his death. Lady Ashworth sets down her teacup with careful precision, gathering her thoughts before speaking. Her voice, when it comes, is refined but carries underlying emotion carefully controlled. I was very young when Uncle Thomas died, only 17, but I remember him well. He was kind to me, patient with my endless questions, encouraging of my education in ways unusual for the time. When he returned from Italy with those statues, I noticed a change in him, an intensity, a preoccupation that seemed to consume him increasingly. She pauses, gazing into the fire as if seeing memories play out in the flames. In his final weeks, he barely slept, barely ate. He would spend entire nights in his gallery with the statues. And sometimes I would hear music, beautiful, haunting music that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. My parents dismissed my concerns, said Uncle Thomas was simply absorbed in his scholarly work, but I knew something more profound was occurring. Holmes leans forward slightly, his attention completely focused. Did he speak to you about the statues? About what he was attempting to achieve? Not directly, but 2 days before he died, he summoned me to his study. He seemed both exhilarated and exhausted, feverish with some inner excitement. Lady Ashworth reaches into her reticule and produces a small leather journal, which she hands to Holmes. He gave me this, told me to keep it safe, to never show it to anyone unless I found someone who would understand. He said someday, someone would solve the mystery of the singing statues, and when they did, this journal should be given to them. Holmes accepts the journal reverently, opening it carefully. The pages are covered in Ashworth's handwriting, more feverish and less controlled than in the documents we previously examined, interspersed with musical notations, geometric diagrams, and passages in ancient Greek. He reads silently for several moments, his expression growing increasingly intent. "This is extraordinary," he murmurs. "Watson, Ashworth documents here what he learned through repeated exposure to the statue's song. He developed a theory, more than a theory, a systematic understanding of how consciousness and matter interact, how sound can bridge the gap between physical and mental realms. And here, look, he describes the experience of dissolution, of ego death and reconstruction in terms that suggest he underwent it multiple times, each time returning with greater understanding, but also greater cost." Lady Ashworth nods sadly. "I believe the statues were killing him slowly, Mr. Holmes. Not through poison or violence, but by showing him truths too vast for human minds to contain while remaining tethered to ordinary existence. He knew this, I think, and chose to continue anyway, driven by curiosity, and perhaps by something the statues themselves awakened in him, a compulsion to understand fully, regardless of consequence. Why come to us now, I ask gently, after so many years of keeping this journal hidden?" She smiles slightly, though her eyes remain sad. "Because 3 weeks ago, I read a small notice in the Times about certain artifacts being moved to government storage for conservation purposes. The article mentioned the Kensington Museum's classical sculpture collection, and though it did not name specific pieces, I knew. I have monitored that collection for 40 years, waited for someone to discover what my uncle discovered. When I made inquiries through my connections, one advantage of age and social position is access to information. I learned that a consulting detective named Sherlock Holmes had been involved in the matter. She turns to Holmes directly. I investigated you, Mr. Holmes, read accounts of your cases, your methods, your reputation for seeking truth, no matter how strange or challenging. And I knew you were the one Uncle Thomas foresaw, the one who would understand his work without dismissing it as delusion or succumbing to it as he did. Holmes closes the journal carefully, holding it as if it were precious beyond measure. Lady Ashworth, this document is invaluable. Your uncle's observations, his theoretical framework, his documentation of repeated exposure to the phenomenon, this fills gaps in my own understanding, provides context for experiences I could not fully articulate. I am deeply grateful you have entrusted it to me. It is yours now, she says simply. I have carried the weight of it long enough. Perhaps you can make better use of Uncle Thomas's sacrifice. Honor his memory by building upon his work, rather than letting it remain hidden and forgotten. She rises to leave, declining our invitation to stay longer, explaining she has a dinner engagement she must attend. But at the door, she pauses and looks back at Holmes with an expression of mingled hope and concern. Mr. Holmes, please be careful. The statues give knowledge, yes, but knowledge always comes at cost. My uncle paid with his life. Others may pay differently, but payment is always required. Do not let curiosity blind you to danger. I will remember, Holmes assures her. Your warning is noted and appreciated. After she departs, Holmes immediately returns to examining the journal with intense focus. I watch him read, seeing his mind work through the information, integrating Ashworth's observations with his own experiences. The evening passes, dinner comes and goes, barely noticed, and still Holmes reads, occasionally making notes in his own commonplace book, cross-referencing passages with other texts he pulls from our shelves. Finally, near midnight, he looks up with an expression I have rarely seen, a mixture of excitement, apprehension, and profound intellectual satisfaction. Watson, Ashworth was brilliant. More than brilliant. He was decades ahead of any contemporary understanding of consciousness and physics. He theorized that what we call consciousness is not produced by the brain, but rather received by it, like a radio receiver picking up transmissions from elsewhere. The brain filters and interprets, creates the illusion of individual selfhood, but underlying everything is a unified field of awareness. He stands and begins pacing, unable to contain his energy. The statues bypass normal filtering mechanisms, allow direct contact with that unified field. That is why the experience feels simultaneously alien and intimately familiar. We are encountering our own deeper nature, stripped of the limitations that usually define individual identity. And Ashworth realized that repeated exposure could permanently alter one's filtering capacity, could open channels that normally remain closed. Is that what happened to him? I ask. The channels opened too wide, and he could no longer function in ordinary reality. Essentially, yes. He became too transparent to the unified field, could no longer maintain the boundaries that define separate existence. He simply dissolved back into the source, leaving behind only a body that had ceased to need occupancy. Holmes stops pacing and looks at me seriously. Watson, this suggests something both wonderful and terrifying. That individual death may not be the end we imagine, but rather a transformation, a return to something larger. But it also suggests that transformation can occur prematurely, before one has completed whatever purpose individual existence serves. I absorb this, trying to grasp implications that seem to shift and multiply the more I consider them. What do you intend to do with this knowledge, with Ashworth's journal? Holmes returns to his chair, sudden weariness evident. Nothing immediate. I need time to fully understand what Ashworth documented, to integrate it with my own observations. But eventually, perhaps, this information should be shared with those capable of appreciating its significance. Scientists studying consciousness, philosophers exploring the nature of reality, researchers willing to approach these questions with both rigor and humility. He picks up the journal again, running his fingers across the leather cover. But not yet. The world may not be ready for these revelations, may lack the framework to understand them, without either dismissing them as fantasy or misusing them dangerously. For now, the journal remains with me, studied privately, its secrets protected until the proper moment for revelation arrives. The clock strikes midnight, and almost involuntarily, we both fall silent, listening. Somewhere across London, in a climate-controlled storage facility, 3 marble statues stand in darkness, silent and still. Do they sing even when no one hears? Does the music continue, vibrating through dimensions we cannot perceive? Or does their song require human consciousness to complete the circuit, to transform potential into actuality? These questions have no easy answers, and perhaps that is appropriate. Mystery persists, as it should, reminding us that knowledge is never complete, understanding never final. We solve one puzzle only to discover deeper enigmas beneath, peel back one layer of reality only to find another waiting to be explored. We should rest, I suggest, noting the deep shadows beneath Holmes's eyes. This knowledge will still be here tomorrow, and you need sleep. Sleep, when it comes, brings dreams, not of singing statues this time, but of vast spaces filled with light, of understanding that feels like coming home, of music that is simultaneously sound and silence, presence and absence, everything and nothing intertwined. I wake once during the night, uncertain whether I have been dreaming or remembering, whether the images come from my own imagination or from something deeper that the statues awakened. Part 9. Morning arrives with frost etching intricate patterns on the window panes, transforming glass into temporary art that will vanish with the sun's warmth. I find Holmes already awake, seated at his desk with Ashworth's journal open before him, though he stares not at the pages, but through the window at the winter sky, his expression contemplative and distant. He finally turns to face me, and I see something has shifted in him overnight, some internal debate resolved. I have decided to document everything, our investigation, Ashworth's findings, my own theoretical frameworks, not for immediate publication, but as a legacy. Sealed records to be opened at some future date, when humanity has developed sufficient understanding to receive this knowledge without either rejecting it outright or misusing it catastrophically. How will you know when that time arrives? I ask, pouring coffee from the pot Mrs. Hudson has left warming. I will not, Holmes admits with a slight smile. But I trust that those who come after us will recognize the moment when it presents itself. Progress is not linear, Watson. Civilizations advance, retreat, advance again along different paths. Eventually, science and mysticism will reconcile their ancient divorce, will recognize they have always been exploring the same territory from different directions. When that reconciliation occurs, information like what the statues contain will prove invaluable. The days that follow establish a new rhythm. Holmes continues his regular casework. We investigate a poisoning in Hampstead, unravel an insurance fraud scheme, locate a missing heir whose disappearance threatens an estate settlement. But his evenings are increasingly devoted to working with Ashworth's journal. He cross-references passages with texts on ancient mystery religions, on acoustic physics, on the emerging field of psychology. Gradually, a comprehensive understanding emerges, one that bridges objective observation and subjective experience in ways that challenge conventional categories. I assist where I can, though much of Holmes's theoretical work exceeds my grasp. But I serve as sounding board and witness, helping him articulate ideas by listening attentively as he thinks aloud, asking questions that force clarification. It is collaborative in its own way, this process of transforming experience into understanding, of building intellectual frameworks around phenomena that resist easy categorization. One afternoon, approximately 6 weeks after Lady Ashworth's visit, we receive an unexpected caller, Aldridge, whom we have not seen since ensuring his recovery. He appears much improved, his colour healthy, his manner composed, though I detect lingering traces of his ordeal in the occasional distant look that crosses his features. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, forgive my unannounced arrival," he begins, after Mrs. Hudson has shown him in. "I have been meaning to visit, to thank you properly for your assistance, and to share something I believe you should know." We settle him in a chair with tea, and he continues, his voice steady but thoughtful. "Since our experience at the museum, I have been researching the statue's history more thoroughly. I felt compelled to understand what we encountered, even knowing I would never seek to activate them again. And I discovered something remarkable in monastery records I obtained through correspondence with archivists in Italy." He produces a folder of documents, photocopied pages in Italian, with his own English translations attached. The monastery that housed the statues before Baron Ashworth's purchase kept detailed records of their acquisition. The statues were excavated from the Delos Temple ruins in 1843 by an Italian archaeologist who died shortly after completing the excavation, died in circumstances identical to Baron Ashworth's passing. Before that, fragmentary records suggest the statues have claimed at least 4 other lives across the centuries, always scholars or seekers who discovered how to activate them. Holmes accepts the documents, scanning them with rapid intensity. "A pattern of mortality," he murmurs. "Each generation, someone finds the key, experiences the revelation, and cannot survive its weight. Yet the statues persist, waiting for the next curious mind." "But here is what truly fascinates me," Aldridge continues, leaning forward with scholarly excitement, overcoming his previous wariness. "In each documented case, the individual who died left behind some record, journals, letters, artifacts, that advanced human understanding in their field. The Italian archaeologist made breakthrough discoveries about ancient religious practices. A Greek scholar in the 17th century produced treatises on harmonic theory that influenced musical development for generations. Each death, while tragic, contributed knowledge that outlasted the individual life." He pauses, meeting Holmes's gaze directly. "I believe the statues are teachers, Mr. Holmes. Dangerous teachers, certainly, but teachers nonetheless. They offer knowledge at the price of the seeker's life. But that knowledge then propagates through humanity, advancing collective understanding incrementally across centuries. It is as if the statues themselves are playing a very long game, slowly elevating human consciousness generation by generation. Holmes sits back, processing this interpretation. An intriguing theory, Aldrich. It suggests purpose rather than random danger, intentional design rather than accidental hazard. The ancient sculptors created not merely art, but a pedagogical tool, one that operates across timescales humans barely comprehend. But you survived, Aldrich points out. You activated the statues, experienced their full intensity, yet you remain alive and functional. That breaks the pattern, suggests either you discovered some protective method the others lacked, or perhaps that you are meant to survive, to carry forward whatever knowledge the statues transmitted. The room falls silent as we consider implications. Holmes's survival where others perished, is it merely luck, exceptional mental discipline, or something more purposeful? Does it suggest he has some role to play in transmitting the statue's knowledge to a wider audience? Or simply that he has not yet paid the full price, that the effects might still unfold over time? I do not claim to know, Holmes says finally, honestly. I took precautions others may not have, maintained analytical detachment, had Watson as anchor, deliberately limited my exposure once I achieved sufficient understanding. But whether these factors account for my survival, or whether some other dynamic is at play, I cannot say with certainty. Aldrich nods, seeming satisfied with this acknowledgement of uncertainty. In any case, I wanted you to have this information. It seemed important that you understand the larger context, the historical pattern your experience fits into. Whatever you choose to do with the knowledge you gained, at least you do so with awareness of what has come before. We spend another hour discussing various aspects of the statue's history, sharing observations and theories. Aldrich has clearly found his own peace with the experience, has integrated it into his worldview in a way that allows him to remain curious without being consumed. When he finally takes his leave, he seems lighter somehow, as if delivering this information has lifted a burden he did not realize he was carrying. After he departs, Holmes returns immediately to his work, but with renewed purpose. Watson, I must accelerate my documentation. If there is indeed a pattern, if the statues claim their price eventually, regardless of initial survival, then I must ensure my understanding is recorded before any such claiming might occur. You think you are still in danger? I ask, alarm rising. I think I exist in a state of uncertainty, Holmes replies calmly. Schrodinger's cat, simultaneously alive and dead until observation collapses the wave function. I feel well, function normally, show no signs of Ashworth's dissolution, but that may simply mean the process operates on a longer timeline than I assumed. Better to prepare than to assume safety that may not exist. The thought of losing Holmes, of watching him succumb to the same fate as Ashworth and the others, fills me with dread. But I also recognize the futility of trying to prevent him from completing his work. This is who he is, a seeker of truth, regardless of personal cost, someone for whom understanding justifies almost any risk. Then, I will help you document everything as quickly and completely as possible, I say firmly. We work together, as we always have. Whatever time we have, we use it well. Holmes looks at me with an expression of deep gratitude and affection. Thank you, Watson. Your partnership has been the greatest fortune of my life, and never more so than in this endeavour. Together, we will create a record that does justice to what we have learned, that honours Ashworth's sacrifice and the sacrifices of all who came before us. We establish a new routine, mornings devoted to regular casework that pays the bills and keeps Holmes's mind sharp, afternoons and evenings dedicated to the comprehensive documentation project. Holmes writes with fierce concentration, producing pages of analysis, theoretical frameworks, observational notes. I contribute my own perspective, the medical and psychological dimensions that Holmes sometimes overlooks in his enthusiasm for pure deduction. Mrs. Hudson, observing our intensified work schedule, begins leaving meals at regular intervals without being asked, ensuring we eat even when absorbed in intellectual labour. She asks no questions about our project, respecting our privacy, but I catch her watching Holmes sometimes with maternal concern, as if she senses something amiss even without understanding its nature. The winter deepens, snow falling more frequently now, blanketing London in white silence. Christmas approaches, bringing its annual transformation of the city. Shop windows decorated festively, carolers in the streets, the scent of roasting chestnuts and pine boughs. Normally, Holmes has little patience for holiday sentiment, dismissing it as commercial manipulation and enforced cheer. But this year, I notice him pausing occasionally to observe the celebrations with something approaching wistfulness, as if seeing beauty in traditions he previously overlooked. On Christmas Eve, we pause our work to attend a service at a nearby church, not from religious conviction, but from Holmes's unexpected desire to experience the ceremony. We sit in the back, listening to ancient carols sung by voices, amateur but heartfelt, watching candlelight flicker on stone walls, breathing in the mingled scents of incense and winter cold. When the congregation sings Silent Night, Holmes closes his eyes, and I wonder if he hears harmonies beneath the melody, echoes of marble voices that sang a different song in darkness. Afterward, walking back to Baker Street through snow-quiet streets, Holmes speaks softly. All human rituals are attempts to touch something beyond ordinary experience, Watson. Religious ceremonies, artistic performances, scientific experiments. Different paths toward the same goal of transcending everyday consciousness. The statues offer a particularly direct route, but the destination is one humanity has always sought. Do you regret investigating them? I ask. Knowing what you now know, would you choose differently? He considers carefully before answering. No, I would not choose differently. The knowledge gained justifies the risk taken. But I understand now what perhaps I did not before, that every revelation costs something, that you cannot expand consciousness without sacrificing some portion of previous certainty. And that is as it should be. Growth requires dissolution of old forms to make space for new ones. We reach Baker Street to find Mrs. Hudson has prepared a Christmas supper: roast goose, potatoes, vegetables, and a plum pudding that fills our rooms with spiced sweetness. We eat gratefully, appreciating her kindness, and afterward, Holmes surprises me by producing gifts: a new medical bag for my practice, leather-bound and expertly crafted, and a first edition of a text on battlefield surgery I had mentioned wanting months ago. Holmes, thank you. This is remarkably thoughtful, I stammer, genuinely touched. It is Christmas, Watson. Even I can acknowledge the value of expressing appreciation for those who matter to us. He seems slightly embarrassed by his own gesture, quickly changing subjects. Now, I believe you have something for me as well. I deduce from the poorly hidden package in your room that you planned ahead. I retrieve the gift I purchased, a rare monograph on acoustic physics he had been seeking without success. His delight is genuine and unguarded, a glimpse of the enthusiastic scholar beneath the cool detective exterior. We spend the evening quietly, reading our respective gifts, sipping brandy, watching snow fall past the windows. It is peaceful in a way our lives rarely are, a moment of stillness in perpetual motion. And though neither of us speaks of it directly, we both feel the preciousness of this evening, the awareness that all moments are temporary, that the patterns of companionship and routine we take for granted exist in time and will eventually end. Part 10. The new year arrives with clear skies and bitter cold. London frozen into crystalline stillness that transforms the familiar city into something strange and beautiful. Holmes and I continue our documentation work with steady dedication, the manuscript growing daily as we add observations, refine theories, cross-reference sources. By mid-January, the document has become comprehensive. Nearly 300 pages of analysis, personal testimony, theoretical frameworks, and reproductions of key passages from Ashworth's journal. One evening, Holmes sets down his pen with a gesture of finality and leans back in his chair, studying the accumulated pages with satisfaction. It is complete, Watson. Everything I can articulate about the statues, about consciousness and matter, about the boundaries between observer and observed, it is all here, documented as thoroughly as current understanding allows. What happens to it now, I ask, feeling both relief and melancholy that this chapter approaches its end. Tomorrow, I deliver it to Mycroft with instructions for its preservation and eventual release. He will ensure it reaches appropriate archives, sealed until such time as its contents can be properly appreciated. Holmes rises and moves to the window, gazing out at the frozen city. And then, Watson, we return to ordinary life. We solve crimes. We help those in need. We continue the work that gives our existence purpose and meaning. The statues remain in storage. The knowledge remains documented. And we move forward. You sound like you are saying goodbye, I observe quietly, hearing something elegiac in his tone. He turns to face me, and his expression is open, unguarded in a way he rarely permits. Perhaps I am, in a sense, saying goodbye to this particular obsession, to the intensity of seeking that has occupied us these past months, but also acknowledging that all things are temporary, Watson. Cases end, investigations conclude, even the most profound mysteries eventually yield what understanding they will, and then must be released. One cannot live perpetually in revelation. Eventually, one must return to the mundane world and find meaning there as well. The following day, true to his word, Holmes meets with Mycroft at his club, delivering the sealed manuscript with instructions for its handling. I do not accompany him, sensing this is something he must do alone, a formal closing of accounts with forces larger than personal curiosity. He returns to Baker Street late in the afternoon, looking somehow lighter, as if releasing the manuscript has lifted a weight I had not realized he was carrying. It is done, he announces simply. The knowledge is preserved, protected, positioned for future revelation when the time is appropriate. Whatever happens now, the work will survive us. Life does indeed resume its ordinary patterns. January becomes February, winter's harshest month. and we investigate a series of art forgeries, locate a missing will that saves a family from financial ruin, expose a blackmail scheme targeting a government minister. Holmes approaches each case with his characteristic brilliance, but I notice a subtle difference, a patience he previously lacked, a willingness to acknowledge emotional dimensions alongside logical ones, a gentleness with clients who might previously have irritated him with their sentiment or imprecision. We speak less often of the statues as weeks pass, allowing the intensity of that experience to gradually recede into memory rather than remaining perpetually present. But occasionally, in quiet moments, one of us will make a reference, a comment about consciousness, an observation about beauty and transcendence, and the other will understand immediately, will know the reference point even without explicit naming. We carry the knowledge together, integrated into our being, rather than constantly examined. March arrives with the first hints of spring, snowdrops pushing through frozen ground, daylight lasting incrementally longer each evening. One afternoon, as we walk through Hyde Park, observing the seasonal transition, Holmes speaks thoughtfully. I have been considering Aldrich's observation about the statues as teachers, about how each generation's seeker advances human understanding incrementally. If that is true, then perhaps our contribution is this: not merely documenting what we learned, but demonstrating that the experience can be survived, that one can touch transcendence and return intact to ordinary existence. Perhaps that is the lesson this generation needed to receive. You think the pattern has changed because of us? I ask. Perhaps. Or perhaps the pattern is more complex than we understood, with different outcomes possible depending on approach, preparation, intention. Ashworth sought ultimate understanding at any cost, and received it at the cost of his life. I sought understanding bounded by caution, anchored by friendship, and received what was possible within those constraints. Different approaches, different outcomes, but both valid contributions to the larger pattern of human exploration. We continue walking, comfortable in shared silence, watching children play near the Serpentine, their laughter carrying across cold air. Life continues its eternal rhythms, seasons changing, generations succeeding one another, knowledge accumulating grain by grain across centuries. We are small parts of this vast process, contributors to something larger than individual existence. By April, our lives have fully returned to what might be termed normalcy, though I recognize that nothing is quite the same as before. We have been changed by what we experienced. Our understanding of reality permanently expanded, our appreciation for mystery deepened. But we function well in the ordinary world, perhaps better than before, because we know what lies beneath surfaces, what depths wait beneath everyday existence. One evening, as we sit before the fire with our books and pipes, Mrs. Hudson delivering our evening tea with her usual efficient kindness, I am struck by profound gratitude for this life, for these rooms, this companionship, the satisfying work that occupies our days. We have touched something extraordinary, yes, but we have also returned to appreciate the extraordinary nature of ordinary things, the small miracles of friendship and purpose and simple comfort. That we are fortunate, I reply honestly, to have experienced what we experienced and survived to tell the tale, to have each other as witnesses and companions, to have this life with all its challenges and rewards. He nods, a slight smile touching his lips. Indeed. Mystery and wonder exist, Watson, but so does Baker Street, and tea, and firelight, and the satisfaction of problems solved. Perhaps the greatest wisdom is knowing both are real, both have value, and neither negates the other. Outside, London continues its eternal symphony. Carriages rattling past, voices calling greetings, the distant whistle of a train, all the sounds of human civilization pursuing its purposes. We are part of this symphony, individual notes in a composition too vast for any single consciousness to fully comprehend. But we play our parts as well as we can, with integrity and dedication, with curiosity tempered by caution, with wonder balanced by wisdom. The statues remain in their storage, silent and still, waiting perhaps for the next generation's seeker, who will discover how to make them sing. The knowledge remains documented, preserved for future revelation, when humanity is ready to receive it. And we remain here, in these familiar rooms on Baker Street, continuing the work that gives our lives meaning, solving mysteries, helping those in need, bearing witness to the strange and wonderful world we inhabit. The fire burns low, the evening deepens, and still we sit in comfortable companionship, two friends who have journeyed to the edge of understanding and returned to tell the tale. Not every mystery requires solving completely. Not every question demands immediate answers. Sometimes it is enough to know that wonder exists, that beauty transcends ordinary perception, that consciousness touches depths we barely comprehend. And so we rest, grateful for what we have learned and for what we have been able to preserve. The singing statues have taught us their lessons about transcendence and limitation, about the costs of knowledge and the rewards of curiosity, about the delicate balance between seeking and accepting, between knowing and letting mystery remain. If you have journeyed with us through this midnight investigation, if you have listened to our tale of marble muses and impossible music, then perhaps you too have glimpsed something of what we discovered. That reality extends far beyond our daily experience. That beauty exists in dimensions we rarely perceive. That the universe holds secrets we may touch, but never fully possess. And now, dear friend, as this story draws to its close, as the fire burns to embers and sleep beckons, I wish you peaceful rest and dreams of wonder. May you find your own mysteries to explore, your own melodies to discover, your own moments of transcendence, balanced with appreciation for the ordinary world's quiet miracles. If you have enjoyed this journey into Gothic mystery and midnight wonder, I invite you to subscribe, to like, to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement allows more stories like this to be told, more mysteries to be explored in this gentle, sleep-inducing manner. Perhaps you have suggestions for future investigations, other cases you would like to hear narrated in this style. Your input shapes what stories come next. Until we meet again in some future mystery, I bid you good night, peaceful sleep, and dreams that carry you gently into restful darkness. May you wake refreshed, carrying perhaps some echo of marble voices singing ancient songs, some fragment of understanding that ordinary existence is shot through with extraordinary possibility. Sleep well, dear listener. Let the world fade. Let your thoughts quiet. Let rest claim you as gently as music fades to silence. The mysteries will still be here tomorrow, waiting to be explored. But tonight, simply rest. Good night.